primary educators of the children.
Okay.
We are here to work as parent partners, not as replacements.
So if a prospective student was brought up in a household of no particular political affiliation, whether you want to call them atheist or whatever, that would not disqualify them from being a student.
Not at all. We have people that are from that perspective, and the interesting thing is, the people who have come in for protection from the environment of the public schools, or for just the excellence of our education.
Right.
We actually achieved accreditation last November from the National Association of Private Schools. And they made the comment at the time that this school was probably one of the easiest schools to accredit of any of the schools they've worked with, simply because we are so transparent. Our curriculum is so good. Our teaching is so sound. And we do teach those higher level subjects. It is a classical education. Okay. And people come here for the excellence in the education and don't find those things a problem. As a matter of fact, they're very, very happy with us because they see the impact on their children.
If a student is considered a poor student in our traditional public schools, doing very, very poorly, doesn't want to go to school, is sort of a problem student child, if you will you still take that person into your program, or are there criteria saying that they have to prove themselves in the traditional school system first?
One of the things that we do is we look very hard at the grade level. We do a lot of testing. We have a lot of automated testing, and then we do interviews with the children to find out what their language skills are, what their reading skills are, what their writing skills are. Even though in the primary grades, we are kindergarten through 12th grade, so we will test the level to make sure that they know the alphabet, whatever's appropriate for grade level. And we'll do interviews and testing. And one of the unique things is, since our system is set up as an online live school where you have a living, breathing teacher, you're going to be working with the parent and the child up through the primary grades. We can level test and then put a child where the child needs to be. It's a mistake to set up a child for failure by putting them at a level higher than they should be. Right. And we find, of course, as you might guess, a lot of the students coming out of the public schools are years behind in language skills, years behind in math skills. Right. But they can take, in our school, from 6th grade on, they can take a 6th grade math class and an 8th grade English class. It depends on where their level is. They can mix and match.
That is fantastic. One thing I have railed about for years, and my listeners could say, oh, they roll their eyes when they hear this because I mention this all the time. I don't know how you get to take around 30 children, place them into one cubicle, and because they were a certain age on September 1st, or whatever the criteria is for that school district, everyone of that age group now sits in this one room, and there may be over 30 students. They all come from different social, ethnic backgrounds, educational backgrounds. One student's parents may be teachers themselves. The other one may come from a family in which there was no education whatsoever, but they just work hard to eke out a living. And so you have this diversity of maturity, if you will, of intellect and whatever, and you put them all in one room and teach them all exactly the same thing, give them all exactly the same test, and that ain't fair. It just doesn't make any sense. Never made any sense to me. And I guess you got around that, though. Your school gets around that.
Yes, and that's the statist viewpoint. People are not widgets. I believe God makes everybody different. We're all sovereign individuals. We all have our own skills and talents and unique abilities, and we've all had different experiences. So somebody that's been raised in a cage and comes out of a bad environment and is years behind should not be stuffed in a room with age-appropriate kids, because that's the widget mentality. Yeah. All the statist schools in history have done that, and ultimately that becomes a criteria for the elimination of some of those citizens of the Nazi era, the communist era,
Right.
Soviet Union. If you weren't age appropriate, grade level or appropriate or whatever, you ended up digging ditches, or worse yet, in Siberia or in a death camp. The concept here is we care about people. We care about individual people. We want people to grow up with a sound education. And one of our mottos is we are teaching children how to think, not what to think. They're not here to be impressed or marinated with
Right.
a particular conditioned response. Common Core is the epitome of the conditioned response.
Okay.
There's one right answer, and it's the answer they provide. And what's really frightening is if you look at the Common Core curriculum, a lot of the materials that are being used, this is one of the books that's being used. It's called United States History, Preparing for the Advanced Placement Examination. It sounds very lofty. You go through and you read the book and you find out that they have not the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, but a summary of the Constitution and a summary of the Bill of Rights that these kids are supposed to study for this advanced placement test. And for example, Second Amendment, I think you're probably familiar with that simple phrase. The Second Amendment in their version is the American people are allowed to keep guns in a state militia.
A little change of wording there.
Yeah, a massive change of wording. It basically has eliminated the entire individual nature of the right. And if you have followed politics at all, you know that Barack Obama has been feverishly attacking states and threatening to withdraw federal funds if they don't abolish any state militia they might have, claiming that the National Guard, of course, is the state militia. They don't need one.
Right.
But if you are familiar with the Dick Act that formed the National Guard, it was very clear in the language of the bill itself that the National Guard was never intended to be the militia that the Constitution
that is correct.
mentions in the Second Amendment. So, the whole thing is fairly transparent. If you look at the First Amendment, they've added a parenthetical phrase to the bottom of it that doesn't exist in the First Amendment, except in cases of separation of church and state.
Right.
So this is what's happening in the teaching. Not only is it a one-size-fits-all prescribed answer to every question, not only is it internationalized, and if you look at their own promotional materials, it certainly didn't come from the bottom up from a group of governors and educators.
Right.
It came from two lobbying organizations in D.C.,
right.
both very internationalist in their viewpoint. But it also prescribes answers that are horrifying when you look at the impact and effect. One of the English exams, we hear, well, it's only English and math. One of the English exams or exercises that I have here on my desk has a series of questions. Reword these questions to make them more powerful. Yeah. One of the questions is, every order of government must be obeyed.
Wow.
That's not an English lesson.
Wow. Oh my goodness gracious! You know what? I'm a terrorist. What can I tell you? I mean, by all these definitions, I should be, I guess I'm a candidate for Guantanamo. It's terrible. I mean, but this is what bothers me, and I railed about this as well. This is one of my favorite subjects, by the way. I shouldn't say my least favorite subject. That's why I rail about it. But it seems that those people who go into the public school system, from my perspective, it's a prejudiced statement, I agree with you, is that people who become teachers are those people who were unable to break away from a failed system, so they stay in the system. They just change their place in the classroom from the seat to the front. And they really never leave the system. So what they are teaching is what they've been exposed to in the classroom, which is exactly what you're talking about, and then reinforcing that to the next group. So then when you bring up these principles, people look at you like you've just grown another head or something, or you're an alien, or a terrorist or something like that. And these are what you're saying is so basic. They're basic to the understanding of the the true American psyche, but you are being considered a radical, by their definition. This is what frightens me.
I've done a lot of examination and investigation. I've spoken for over 30 years on these issues, and the history of the American public school system is one of the most horrifying stories that you could possibly imagine.
I agree.
I have a video on our site. We have a YouTube site, and it's called the YouTube channel is called FreedomProject.com, DOTCOM. So it's WYSIWYG there, phonetic for those people who didn't learn look-say. But this video is a talk that I gave all over the country for a couple of years now. And it chronicles the history of the American public school system and the capture of the public school system. There are quotes in there that are just horrific. And if you look at the organizations of today, and you harken back to the 90s when we had Hillary saying it takes a village to raise a child. Now you have Melissa Harris Perry of the MSNBC, who just happens to be the head of Lean Forward, one of the forward umbrella of organizations that the Obamas have put together. And it's an advocacy group for public school. She gets on the air, and I have a recording. It's on the web. You can go find it. Melissa Harris Perry says, well, kids don't really belong to families. They don't really belong to parents.
That's right.
They belong to whole communities. And we just have to develop this collective notion of children. And, it's Marxist dialectic, sentence after sentence, line after line, statement after statement. And what she's telling us is your kids don't belong to you. They don't belong to the family. They don't belong to God, which I think most Christians, we don't really feel we have ownership of children in that sense.
Correct.
We're stewards of the children. And if we don't believe that as a Christian, that there will come an awakening one day when they walk out on their own. But we are seeing a complete reversal. It's the world turned upside down. That is the nature of the public schools. For 22 years, the head of the American Federation of Teachers, AFT, was a gentleman who was also concurrently one of the founders, board members, and leading lights of the Young Socialist League of America. If you go, for example, you've heard of the Saul Alinsky Communist Manual for Community Organizing and Changing America. Saul Alinsky wrote a couple of books, Rules for Radicals and Reveille for Radicals. And if you want to get a copy of that book, I know where you can get one. All you have to do is go to the National Teachers Association, the NRA. I'm sorry, not NRA. What is it? The National
Education?
NEA. Yeah, I'm the senior moment here. NEA, the National Education Association website today. And on their recommended reading list for books for teachers, you can buy a copy of Rules for Radicals and Reveille for Radicals. These people made a statement in 1946, the NEA. On their website, you can find their announcement in 1946, almost immediately after we joined the United Nations, as to how the teacher has to play a major role in preparing children for one world government.
Well, they're doing a good job of that, because there's teachers in my family, and they think that I have totally lost my mind with my radio program. They could not agree. They agree with absolutely nothing I say, because I do not repeat and the dialogue that they've memorized, and they can. What bothers me is they're teachers and they cannot think. They can only repeat, and it really grabs me. I say, well, can you answer this question? And then they give me a canned answer again. I said, it had nothing to do with my question. It's almost as if they're reading out of a textbook. And what bothers me is I actually try to engage in conversations with public school teachers. And it seems that if it's a female and I ask them a question, and I'm not nasty to them, I say, I have a question. You being a teacher, here's a problem. Maybe you can help me. The two most common responses I receive, and I kid you not, this almost sounds like I'm being nasty, but I'm trying to be very polite, is they just stare at me and they can't answer, or there's tears in their eyes and they get very upset. and I very rarely get an answer. I mean, it's almost as if I went up to them and said something nasty to them, slapped them around a little bit, and then they started to cry. And I've tried so many ways to say, could you help me understand why we are doing this, and I'll explain my situation. And they just stare at me, and it's like deers frozen in the headlights. They're frozen. They cannot move. It's the most debilitating situation that you could ever find yourself in.
I agree wholeheartedly. I've had those conversations, and the other response, if you get somebody that's really a dedicated Marxist, that is in the school system, a real leftist, they will have a conditioned response. They'll have a statement that they say that usually has very little to do with the subject matter or the question. It's a statement of their control. It's a statement of their rightness. It's not an argument. It's a projection. And I've been frustrated by that. I find so many people who have this perspective, and it's a conditioned response. It's very Pavlovian. If you think about grandparents and then parents, and then this individual goes to school and they study under people who have this worldview. And anybody who doesn't have that worldview is vilified and marginalized and eventually pushed out of the system. We had a school system, just by example, a school system here in the state of Wisconsin with 686 employees, top to bottom, administrators, janitors, etc. They polled that group. There was one registered Republican and 2 independents. All the rest were registered Democrat, Green Party, Socialist Party USA. I mean, it was incredible, but proof positive of what I maintain. But when they are marinated in that, they can only vomit up the conditioned response. Right. They are frogs in the water who have accepted the marination. They're cooked. The people like myself that go through the school system, and we have parents that believe in God and are conservative. My father was a D-Day veteran. He went ashore on Omaha Beach on D-Day. Very, very strong, patriotic American. And he used to be the classic letter writer to the editor in a local paper, and he was kind of famous in that regard locally. But I was getting these 2 stories, but I'm getting, dinner table conversation from my dad and, war stories in this. And then I go to school for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And it fulfilled a quote from Charles Potter. Charles F. Potter was one of the signatories of the Humanist Manifesto. And he made the bold statement in 1930. He said, every American public school is a school of humanism. After all, what effect can 1 hour of Sunday school on a small percentage of children have against 8 hours a day, 5 days a week of humanism?
Yeah.
And that was the plan. That was the goal.
Right.
John Dewey, the father of modern progressive or public education, there was a brass bust of him on the counter of the administration office of my high school in Yuba City, California, Central Valley, farming community, very, very conservative community. But the local public school, Yuba City High School, had a bust of this guy on the counter. And it was John Dewey who said that the public school system needed to be a proselytizer of a new faith. He was one of the signatories of the Humanist Manifesto 1, as was Charles Potter. Right. Now, you come up in more recent years, the protege or the next generation of John Dewey was John Dunphy. And John Dunphy was even more strong in his statements. He wrote an article in the, I think it was February 1973 issue of the Humanist magazine. And this is an educator, revered educator. He said the teacher in the public school classroom must be the proselytizer of a new faith, the faith of humanism, resplendent in the delivery of the promise never realized by the rotting corpse of Christianity. That's a fairly blatant agenda.
Wow. All right. Alan, if you would hold on, we're a little bit late for our station identification. Please do not go away. Okay, you promise?
Okay.
Okay.
You're listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Political talk derived from a historical perspective. Not always palatable, but good food for thought. Pure libertarian talk with host Joe Cristiano. LibertyTalkRadio.com.
Express Test is your go-to company for on-site occupational health testing services. That's right, we said on-site. That means we will meet you at your facility for a free health and occupational safety consultation. Express Test specializes in hearing conservation, respiratory protection, and employee safety. We can help you establish viable programs tailored to your business and employee needs. For your free consultation, call 918-743-2929 or visit us at expresstest.com. That's 918-743-2929 or expresstest.com. Do you find yourself asking, what did you say? Aaron Cristiano of Ranch Acres Audiology has over 25 years of experience helping patients just like you.
Hearing requires conservation. We need to be aware and we need to be responsible for our own hearing health.
Understand more with a little help from Ranch Acres Audiology. Call 918-749-7711. That's 918-749-7711 to learn more. We'd like to thank attorney Constance Squires for her support of Liberty Talk Radio. If you want a comprehensive way to affordably avoid legal issues, call Constance Squires. For a free consultation, call 918-254-9283 or go online at isthyWillDone.com.
This isn't your typical talk radio show. This is Liberty Talk Radio.
The second part of our program, we do encourage people to call. Our toll-free number is 888-773-4496. I'll repeat that, 888-773-4496. When you call, if you're not prompted, you need to press the 1 button, and then that will place you on the board, and I will know that you want to ask a question, and I'll bring you in. All right, so it's 888-773-4496. Don't be embarrassed. There's no such thing as a stupid question. Please call, ask a question, make a comment, or if you disagree, even better. If you disagree, we'll have some dialogue there, and we will be respectful to you, I promise you. All right. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, you're probably on video with one of the worst students in the world. I was a horrible grammar school when I went to grade school. I did very poorly. In high school, I was asked to leave twice. My poor mother, she was an angel. I made her suffer, you know. And I finally woke up about 40 years old. I finally said, I started to read and I started to really get into it. I mean, I recall taking days off from work, and I had a pretty good job at the time, and just to read, you know. And I did literally a 180, and then I got involved politically. I even actually ran for U.S. Congress back in the 2000 general election, and I found myself being told by my competitors' entourage, they were so happy to have me on the program because I energized the conversation. And I thought I was getting a compliment from my from those people I was running against, because so many times you'll have either Republican or Democrat spouting the same dialogue over and over again, and I brought some refreshing ideas and comments. Unfortunately, I couldn't get to change their mind because they're ideological, you know, they're stuck in their ideology. But it was an interesting experience. But I'm a real late bloomer. I'm a really, really late bloomer. And I started giving speeches in my late 30s, I guess my 40s. And I worked for a very large good corporation, but I realized there was something as wrong with the way corporations are organized, the same way our schools were organized. And I saw this connection, and I actually have a registered trademark today of America's foremost corporate exorcist. And I guess what you are is you are America's educational exorcist, aren't you?
That's
ordain you with that
that's an
word?
interesting title, which I will tell you. That's a mantle I'll take with
Oh,
some pride. I think yes. As I used the term earlier in the show, I am a recovering public school student, and my primary goal in life is to help a lot of other people recover. We don't have a 12-step program; we have a 12-year program for kids. But I've discovered personally that a lot of the kids that didn't fit in and don't fit in today, they have a cure for your problem now. They give you drugs and keep you zombieized for the 12 years, and then they just go ahead and graduate you.
right.
But no disrespect to anybody who's on medication. I think the vast majority of it is unnecessary, even insidious. We have a disease that didn't exist prior to 1955, and all of a sudden we've got 40 million young people that need to be drugged to make them behave in school. There's some issues there with families and discipline and things. I understand that, but what I will get back to here is that many times it's because you sense that what you're being taught doesn't ring true. We have this built-in filter, and it gets clogged after a while with the garbage that you get in the public school system and media and entertainment. But we have this built-in filter, and I think most kids are pretty perceptive. And they start out, they go through this process, and at some point, many of them just decide, you know what, this is bunk. Most of what I'm hearing is not true. Most of what I'm hearing isn't going to help me. I love the little memes, to the point of I'm math challenged. I have an MBA, and my biggest struggle was getting through algebra 1 and 2 and statistics. But the little meme about 3 angels dance on the head of a pin, and a train is running 90 miles an hour, and 2 dogs jump off. How many potatoes are there in the last car? Word problems look like that to me. Now, I'm fine with multiplication, addition, subtraction, but I had the same experience. I looked at history and I thought, wait a minute, this doesn't sound right to me. It's all black and white. The communists are our friends. Everybody that lived below the Mason-Dixon line is an enemy. The guys that wore blue, they were all saints. The guys that wore gray were all sinners. There were all these things, and it just didn't ring true. And particularly because I was somewhat of a reader. I did my reading on the side. I read the books I wasn't supposed to read or that weren't a part of the curriculum. And it didn't line up, and I had my struggles in public school. I'll just say everyone needs to stop where they are. This is not really an issue anymore of left, right, Republican, Democrat, because we're all marinated. I saw an excellent bumper strip the other day about Common Core. Now, we're probably the world's foremost experts and opponents of Common Core, and somebody had a bumper strip on their car that said, "Not left, not right, just wrong. Stop Common Core."
I love it. You know what was interesting, if I can interrupt for a second, is that, I have to admit, I was a horrible student. My poor mother, and my mother was an angel. If there are angels in heaven, she's one of the head ones. I tell you, she was a most wonderful woman. She stayed home, took care of the family, and would tell my father all the time. She would say, "Victor, if only people would stay home and mind their own business, the world would be a better place." That was her mantra, and she was absolutely right. She made the best Secretary of State in the world. But
it sounds like Thomas Jefferson,
Yeah. Well, what happened when I was in high school? I mean, they were always calling her and saying, "Your son doesn't belong in school. He's that bad, But then I took 2 courses as a senior, one in geometry and one in trigonometry. And I got the highest marks in the class.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I reflect back on that, after, 40 years later, 50 years later, and I say, why didn't someone pick that up? Why didn't say, here's a guy who hardly comes to school, is always going to detention. We have to find out where he is. He's a troublemaker. He takes a course in geometry and trigonometry and gets the highest mark in the class. We found something for this kid. or something. No one ever cared. No one, and you know what? It took me 40 years to realize that no one recognized that I had some interest or talent or what brain waves, whatever it was, in that field. And it was interesting when I graduated. I wanted to go into automotive engineering, but my father wouldn't allow me because to him that was a dirty job, and he came from the other side, hardly spoke English, and worked hard with his hands, built his own company, and to him that was downgrading, being an automotive engineer. And so I wasn't allowed to do that. In fact, I went to school, applied, and my father says, ain't going. And I never did. And so I never did what I want until I became, till after 60 years old. I started to do what I want. And but isn't that a shame? How many students are there that have these talents in certain areas? And when I say that, I want to include the world's billionaires. More than half of the world's billionaires have no college education, and a majority of those who don't have a college education don't even have a high school education, and they're the world's billionaires. What do they know that we don't? And how come we don't pick up these indications from students saying this person has a talent here?
You have to understand what the purposes of the public schools are. And the difference, I mentioned the world turned upside down. A parent's role is to find out what God made that child to do.
Right.
What is their skill? What is their talent? What is their ability? What is that God-given ability that they are to develop and carry forward? A parent or a mentor, it could be a mentor. We have some billionaires that are not such great people, George Soros and others, and sometimes the way that they achieve that is to, become a minion of the Nazis and then the communists and whoever else they can latch on to make their money. But generally what happened was somebody, a parent or a mentor, and it's the parent's job to do this. We've lost that in this country. The parents are the primary educators, and they know their children better than anybody else. They do most of the primary education before the child ever hits a school. And if they love their child, they should be striving to figure out what it is that God has for their child to do, what it is that child really is fitted to do.
Right.
The public school system and the statist government school systems of any statist organization or any country in the world that has this governmental, particularly federal education system, their job is to create widgets, useful idiots who obey, pay taxes, do what they're told.
Right, agree.
And the corporate partnership, that incestuous corporate partnership between a Bill Gates and Pearson Publishing, which is now becoming the monopoly publisher of school books, they get together, they make Common Core. What are they looking for? They're looking for docile, willing minions to work in their companies and earn them more billions. They're looking for people who do what the government tells them to do, like the question I raised. They want widgets. They want everybody in that same mold, and that is the purpose of Common Core. That's the purpose of the public school system. And when that system's also been captured by people with a political ideology like Marxism, they're going to impart that as well. There's a reason that it's politically incorrect to believe that communism even exists, even though the majority of the countries in the world have some form of Marxist, socialist, collectivist government. Somehow we're supposed to believe in America that communism is dead.
Right.
The word conspiracy. I just wrote a lengthy thing on my LinkedIn page, a post, talking about the word conspiracy and how that word, along with other words like gay or gun owner or, there's a whole plethora of them, have been turned into trigger phrases. If you utter the word conspiracy and you are a Christian, conservative, Republican, you're immediately vilified, ridiculed, pilloried, tarred and feathered because you're this right-wing extremist nut. Conspiracy nut, conspiracy kook, there's a whole list. But if you're a leftist, if you're Hillary Clinton or Obama or somebody that has a pretty obvious leftist ideology, you can use the term all day long. There's a racist conspiracy, there's a right-wing conspiracy, there's a gun nut conspiracy, there's an NRA conspiracy, and somehow nobody questions that in the media. Nobody questions that in the government. They don't set some Homeland Security group to investigating that group. because maybe they're spouting, sections of the Constitution. We need to investigate them. But when somebody stands up at a U.S. military base and screams Allahu Akbar and kills a bunch of people and wounds a lot more, we have a president that gets up and says, well, now we don't want to rush to judgment. There's no evidence. There's no evidence this is anything but a workplace related, shooting. We've been conditioned to obey, just like that question in the English exercise. We've been conditioned not to question.
Yeah, I've always had
certain
personally
orders.
a problem with obedience, I guess,
Yeah,
Maybe that's why I'm a talk show host.
That's the widget
People
factory.
can turn me off, but they can't shut me up.
And that's part of the problem with all the kids on Ritalin and the idea of pushing kids through grade to grade, whether or
Right.
not they learn, and not caring whether or not. Now they're talking about school to work and college and career ready. That's a catchphrase. That's a
Career
buzz term for the widget is complete.
Right.
Because they haven't done anything to ask this child or his parents, his or her parents, what job he wants or where he wants to
That's
work.
right.
Did you see the articles? A plethora of articles came out just recently. Chinese woman raised in communist China, went through the public school system in communist China, came over here, discovered freedom, desired freedom, left her country, immigrated, got her citizenship. She's a U.S. citizen, married to an American citizen, and they have a number of children. And she was schooling her children and looking at the public school system. She looked into Common Core, examined it very carefully, and came out very very simply and bluntly and said, this is the communist education system from China. That's what Common Core is. Now, this is a person who should know. He went through 12 years of it.
But you would think that they would be the teachers here would know, but the teachers don't know. The teachers are the problem is that with all the best intentions, and they're very nice people, and they're very loving and to their family, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and they're very dedicated, to the children. They don't know what they're doing. They have no idea what they're doing. We talk about intellectual derelicts. I always thought that was a bad term. We should say degreed derelicts. Because if you're intellectual, you cannot be a derelict. You cannot do that. We're not intellectual. We're degreed. We're degreed derelicts. And that's what we have. People who have been conditioned with a degree, teaching our students the same malarkey and under the same paradigm that they worked under, and they cannot see any change whatsoever. It's rare that a teacher actually has a epiphany and says there's something wrong with this.
Well, many of them are ivory tower intellectuals who have there's an old saw, if you can't do, teach. But these people went through the system, got a degree in some discipline, went to work for a college, became a professor, and they've been teaching that discipline. They've never actually done it. When I went back to school, I went to the University of Phoenix, and whatever anybody thinks of the University of Phoenix, their model is very much like our model. We have journalists. We have Dr. Susan Benecki, a PhD in chemical propulsion at the Chemical Propulsion Lab in NASA, teaching advanced chemistry to our high school students. We have people that are journalists. We have people that are authors. We have people that are historians. They actually know what they're talking about, and they've done it successfully. And that was the model at University of Phoenix.
Interesting.
You had to be a working professional with a gainful employment of some stature and a degree to teach in their marketing classes or their administrative classes or their personnel classes. And that's the model that America was built on. If you didn't teach your child at home or in a local school supervised by parents, where the teachers were often hired by a group of parents and then lived in the parents' homes on rotation and taught in that little local school where their children were carefully monitored and the parents participated, when they got beyond what could be done there, what did they do? They went to apprenticeships. If you wanted your son to be a silversmith, you sent him to Paul Revere. If you wanted your son to be a wagon rider or a farmer, you found somebody with good character who had skills in those areas.
Right.
You didn't go find somebody who's done nothing their whole life but study about it, learn about it, then teach about it.
Yeah, you know, a very sad story. My wife went to college first, wanted to become an audiologist, and she went to the counselor. She wanted to be an audiologist, and that's a hearing doctor professional.
Yes.
And the counselor, and I won't go into the reasons why, but it was a physical thing, and said that, oh, I'm sorry, you don't qualify, you can't qualify to be an audiologist. And she took what that person said at face value. And she says, oh, I can't. He says, oh, no, you can't. You can never become an audiologist. You don't qualify. Now, she was a straight A student, all right? She got her master's degree in worthlessness and got a job as a personnel manager. She hated the job. And one day, just by accident, she was asking someone. She said, "You know, I always wanted to be an audiologist, but I can't because they told me because of my handicap." And the person looked at her and said, "That has nothing to do with it." She says, "You're kidding." She says, "No, whoever told you that?" And she explained. She said, "Nothing." So she went back to school and she went to another counselor and said, "I want to be an audiologist. Could I come back?" And she had straight A's. I mean, she had no trouble with school. She'd get it. In fact, she had a grant in the whole bit. And they said, of course you can be an audiologist. She took what that one person said and wasted something like 6 years of her life.
And
It's a sad story. Every time I hear that, I get angry because of one jerk saying and had no idea what he was talking about. Now, my problem is that there's no one in these schools talking to these children. How many in these schools where you have many minority children who only see the basketball court as a way out because they think they're going to go to the NBA? And statistically, the chances of them being in the NBA out of high school, just to get drafted, not to play, is 1 out of 9,635. Those are the odds. The odds of actually playing is like 1 out of 20,000. And yet, you have all of these counselors encouraging these kids to learn to play basketball at the expense of everything else, knowing that there's not a snowball chance in hell of them ever playing basketball with any major team. Even minor league.
These are the false hopes that leave people dashed when they get to that point and they realize they haven't been prepared for life. They haven't been prepared for a career. They've been divested of any sense of belief in anything. One of the most interesting statements I've heard was the father of one of the young men that was killed at Columbine. You remember a number of them. There was a young man that was killed at Columbine. I believe it was the young man that was dropped out the window or tried to escape out the window. He died of his wounds there. The father of this young man was a Christian. It was a Christian family. And somebody asked him in the interviews that followed, are you bitter? Are you angry at the two young men, Klebold and the other kid that shot all these kids and killed your son? And his answer was phenomenal. He said, actually, no. He said, if I blame anybody, I blame myself because I put my child in an environment where from the ground up, from kindergarten up, those two young men had been taught to believe exactly what they then lived out. Right. They were taught they were primordial slime, life didn't matter, there's no God, there's no, human beings are just, a different form of animal. And they eventually, reacted to that training to think as an animal as an animal, the fight, flight, reaction. And I blame the schools and the humanism of the schools and the thinking and teaching of the schools because those young men didn't do anything that they weren't conditioned to do for 12 or 13 years.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to give you the upshot of my wife becoming an audiologist. Yes. She did. And I'm a business person, so she has two offices. She's in private practice today, and she goes to 4 locations. So she's very successful. And it worked out, but it was wasted many years and a lot of consternation, and she had jobs that she absolutely hated, but that's what her degree was in, so that's what she had to do. When I was a young kid, my mother used to say, she said, I had this little desk in my room. I'm a New Yorker, I was from Harlem, I sang doo-wop back in the 50s, by the way. That's how far back I go. But we lived in the Bronx for a while, lived in this apartment. And she said, what are all those things on your homework? And I told my wife, I said, well, that's my Stromberg 97 carburetor, because I was still playing around with cars and taking things apart on my homework assignment. But anyway, we don't recognize these things. And now we only have a couple of minutes to go. We have this Godzilla called the public education system. What do? In 60 seconds or less, what do we do?
All right. Well, let me propose that Freedom Project Education is a part of the solution, and we've always intended that we would create imitators, and we like to see that. Other people see it as competition. We don't. We see it as a movement. We are part of the same force moving to correct a big problem. So we need to see more private schools based on this. I think the online model is an inexpensive and excellent way to reach virtually anybody. Can go to our school. It's inexpensive. It's of very high quality. It teaches the right things the right ways. And it creates a remnant of thinking American citizens who understand what the values of this country are, and it's on the right foundations. So I'd like to, the URL is FPE for Freedom Project Education, fpeusa.org. I think they're one of the most prominent movements and important movements in America today is the homeschool movement. Make a choice to get your child out of there. Find an alternative to the mill. Find an alternative to the widget factory, and get your children out, your grandchildren out. If you got to dig in your pocket and pay a little extra, the question you got to ask first is, do I love my children enough to make the right choice for them?
Right.
And that's really the solution. Is the American people need to wake up and realize what's been done to us, who's in control of it. My video is online on our YouTube channel, freedomproject.com, DOTCOM. It's called Who Owns Your Children? And every American needs to watch that. You need to realize that the people who are teaching the teachers who teach the teachers at Columbia University 2 years ago in Atlanta at the teachers conference, the major speaker there was Bill Ayers, the former head of the Weather Underground, a Marxist revolutionary who, if you go to the web, you can see a video of one of the other undercover agents talking about a meeting with 25 of these intellectuals with advanced degrees from major universities, discussing very calmly and coldly how they would kill 25 million Americans that couldn't be converted to the Marxist philosophy. These are the people, and by the way, it was Bill Ayers' living room that Barack Obama's presidential campaign was launched. So these are the people who are in charge of much of our country, and certainly almost all of our educational system. Get your kids out.
Right. Well, Alan, I hope you enjoyed being on this program as much as we've enjoyed having you on it. It's
very much so.
It's a terrific educational program. I hope that this program is viewed by enough people so it has an impact and assists you in the mission of your school. And I hope we're just part of that process that gets the word out. I want to thank you so much for being on our program, and I do hope that you will accept our invitation to return sometime at a later date.
Absolutely, I'd love to. And thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about these things. They're very near and dear to my heart.
Thank you so much, Alan, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Wow, that was really terrific. This is really terrific. So, folks, this is the end of today's program. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support. What happened to that music? My music? Okay, I can hardly hear it. Okay, this is the end of today's program. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support. We'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, folks, as my wife says, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You'll be listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well, stay tuned.